Let's try this again. Sorry about the sound issues. We did test run this a couple of times and it worked absolutely fine, but you know how these things go. We were just talking actually offline about how stressful live sound work is and why we all like to be in studios. All right, starting again, Screen Music and Sound Guild is a newly invigorated version of the Screen Composers Guild, which has been around for about 8 or 9 years. We, about a year ago, we reincorporated and expanded our membership to include all of those who work in music and sound and every other aspect of sound to do with anything with pictures. So we've got quite a lot of new members on board, and what we're trying to do is obviously at the moment keep things rolling, keep things interesting by having some of these panels online, as well as in person when we can in Auckland and in Wellington. Well, you can probably do that right now. But so I encourage you, if you haven't heard about the Guild, to sign up and become a member if you're interested, or at least sign up to our newsletter so you can get some interesting news and facts and tips and ideas and connect with other people in the music, sound and screen worlds. I'm the co-chair of the Guild, and behind the scenes we also have a number of other of our executive committee watching today. And just a reminder, we have another one of these events tomorrow on a whole other separate subject. So today we're going to be talking to the team from Native Audio, Nick Buckton, Jordan Smith and Brendon Morrow, about their work on the premium TVNZ series, The Panthers, which has just been released, and to general acclaim and lots of cool press and some great reviews. I must say I've been really enjoying it. It's a really fascinating blend of a blend of almost documentary, contemporary music, and also historical or period drama in 1970s Auckland, which I vaguely remember, being born and halfway through it. So today I just thought I'd get our speakers to perhaps briefly introduce themselves, a little bit about where they come from in terms of their career, or wherever they like really, and I guess a little bit about what they actually did on this project. Nick, if I can kick off with you again. Yep.
Sure, no worries. So I'm Nick Buckton. I'm a sound designer and re-recording mixer at Native Audio in Auckland. On Panthers, I was the sound designer / sound effects editor. It was mixed by Gareth Van Niekerk. But yeah, that was my role. I've been at Native about 20 years. Background, as we were saying before, bands, which is the same as most people in our positions after the pipe dream of rock stardom dissipates. And yeah, I've been there about 20 years, and I mostly cut sound effects for a living, which is pretty fun.
Great, cool. And look, we're going to get into more detail obviously, but I just thought a brief intro would be cool. Jordan.
Yeah, I'm Jordan Smith. I was the dialogue editor and ADR mixer for the Panthers. I started at Native Audio around 2012, it would have been. I kind of came out of Maine's Music and Audio Institute of New Zealand, started there, wanting to record bands and things like that, not really kind of knowing what to do out of high school, and then kind of realizing I wanted to do more post stuff. And then I was lucky enough to end up editing audiobooks and things at Native Audio about then. And then from there, just kind of grown with the team, did a brief stint in Canada doing dialogue editing on a few B movies and things, and then came back just before 2020, and that's kind of where I've been. Yeah.
Fantastic. So I didn't know where you were going to go when you said B movies. Yeah. But that's cool. We'll deep dive into that later.
Oh, no worries.
Brendon.
Yeah, hi, I'm Brendon. I started in audio sort of in the early to mid 2000s at Native Audio, which was then Eden Terrace, which was then Eden Post, and then ended up as Native Audio. I left there sort of about 2009, 2010, and went traveling for a few years and got back sort of in the early 2010s. And since then I've just been freelance in Auckland, freelance sort of everywhere, doing advertising, TV, film work, and even some music composition. So yeah, I guess a bit of a jack of all trades, a master of none. And on Panthers, I kind of applied that a little bit. I worked on the dialogue and effects, but mainly my primary role was organizing the music as the music editor. All right.
Well, perhaps just because I should point out that I'm very much a music person. I'm not particularly versed in all the various roles that you have. So forgive me if I ask any completely stupid questions. I should also say to those of you who are watching, if you have any questions at any point, just fire a question in the comment box on Vimeo, and I'll get those through to to ask our speakers today. So just at any point, if you've got any, I'm sure much cleverer questions than I do, please fire away. Well, I guess if we can start with the music, because my initial when I watched the series, it's a fascinating blend of featured music, which often becomes, even within the same scene, becomes background music, and then it becomes featured again. How did that? What did you start with? Did you record the tracks first? Is it live? Some of the stuff seems really live, the hip hop stuff particularly. What came first?
In terms of process, because I mean, as you probably know, there was a few composers involved.
Yeah.
So a lot of the sort of score, I guess what you would traditionally call score, that would sit, against the scene, was done by Jonathan Crayford.
Sure.
And he sort of just cooks up everything himself. I think he does a lot of live recording. He's pretty amazing, the piano. And then he would deliver that stuff. And then they had the whole kind of hip hop angle, which was managed by Choice Vaughan,
right.
Who's Joel Tashkoff. And he works a lot, I think, with Diggy Dupe. So that was kind of that angle. And then there's a whole other world of stuff, which was Troy Kingi and a lot of his material, which was, I think, pulled from stems from his record, and then new stuff that was made for the show and just general jams. And in the edit, I think they had a lot of that stuff. And then they also had just temp tracks. But I guess the interesting thing with this show was we actually ended up compiling a lot of that just in post. I think Tom, primarily the producer, and I think he was director on a few episodes, had some pretty cool ideas. And so our sessions as the show went on became about just playing with that stuff, like with a scene, we'd start with a hip hop track. And then we thought, what if we put it on the radio for a couple of minutes while they're in the scene, and it's like they're listening to it, and then we'll pull it back out again. And that sort of stuff has just sort of evolved through the process of post-production. So
right,
pretty organic, really. Yeah. I don't know how much of Tom was this grand design, but I feel like a lot of it was just on the fly as the show started to come together.
Sort of jamming it. Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Because looking at a couple of articles I read about Tom and Tom Hearn, and so who the other producer's name I've forgotten, but they created the series, I believe, and and a lot of it was obviously the history is fascinating, but and a personal history as well, by the sounds of for some of the creators. But it sounded like they used music from the period as a kind of starting point as well, even for creating the actual scenes or creating the series itself.
Yeah, I guess a lot of the stuff that Troy had sort of harked back. I mean, I think some of the tracks they used was from his Freddie Caesar album, and it is that kind of funk sort of stuff, maybe that through it sort of felt a little bit 70s, a lot of it. But then I think a lot of it wasn't also just by any design. I think as we got to sort of episode one, towards the end of episode 1 or 2, we started to feel that all the hip hop stuff would sit quite nicely against the Muldoon, and that was kind of that world.
Right.
And then the theme sort of developed that we would then go and apply through the later episodes. But I don't think too much of it was really designed at the outset. Even with the period stuff, it was just the stuff that had been chosen, and then it all just sort of started to come together once we were playing with it.
Sure. One of our listeners, viewers, whatever you call them, Jake Slaney has asked, was there any live tracked music, like on set? Because some of the when I, looking at the actors perform hip hop, like a free flow stunning rap, it sounds incredibly live, or some bloody good lip syncing going on.
Yeah, I think there's obviously the sequences in the show where Diggy's rapping, and we sort of cut across to that. And I think those tracks were made, and so that was almost treated like a music video. There's a couple of moments of set with, a guitar or something on set, but I don't think there was any real music that was sort of recorded on set, and then that became the center point, and then we built around it. But we did, do a lot of live stuff. Me and Jonathan went out to Manarewa High School and recorded a choir, which was pretty cool, that then he took away and sampled, and that became almost like an instrument that featured a lot in the show. And at the end of the last episode, there's a bit of a musical component. But yeah, in terms of the stuff that he might be referring to, that Diggy stuff, that was more just music video style.
Right.
That was with tracks that were already made.
It was very nicely done, because I was just because I knew we were going to have this conversation, I was really watching. It's a very clever editing as well, but just in terms of the
really feels nice and quite seamless when you transition into the. I think as an idea, it could almost come off jarring, but the way that they managed to treat it and you go in and out of that world, it really does work.
No, very clever. And in terms of working with multiple composers, so there were three, weren't there? Was Jonathan Crayford and the three other artists? Or?
It was Jonathan and then Joel. So that was sort of like, I guess, the score, and then the hip hop world. And then Troy was, I think he lives up north, and he was sort of supplying his stuff. He'd done a lot of the stuff at the outset. So he only came into the studio once, right. And a lot of his was just tracks. And then Tom just trying to chase him down for stems and stuff. That was pretty much the basis of it. But for me, I guess, as a music editor and being that conduit between, I guess, the sound post team and the mixer and the production and the composers, Jonathan was kind of my go-to. He sort of had, I think maybe he'd done a few films before, and so he had a good overview of, like delivering and just sort of what I might look to get. And he was in touch with a lot of the other guys a lot as well, because they were doing a lot of crossover. So at least for me, he was sort of my go-to. And then towards the end of the show, like, I was in touch with Joel a lot as well. But I think in terms of the general composition side, Jonathan was the main touch point for me.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So just a lot. It sounds like a lot of wrangling.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We had a giant Dropbox that's just full of. That was probably like one of the biggest challenges for me in terms of my role, was just file management and version management, and like, I guess, the labeling. A lot of musician stuff, and I kind of fall into this trap when I'm doing music as well. You sort of put on your music hat and take off your post hat, and everything becomes like version 4, no brass, alt end. Yeah. And they go like, oh, is there another version of that track? And you look at the folder and you just think, oh my gosh, which one could it possibly be?
You never put final in the file name as well, do you?
You do, but then you can always just go final. You just keep stacking them up.
Final.
For that.
This is the final.
Yeah, final last.
Yeah.
So yeah, the file management side was pretty big, but it all turned out pretty awesome, I think.
No, it's an I can see must have been an enormously complex job of just liaising with all these different moving parts. How long was the whole project from beginning to end?
You guys might be able to answer that.
It was long, maybe 6 months or something.
It was a little while, yeah. I think it took about that amount of time from, say, like the first turnover. I reckon it would have been probably about 6 months or so. I think everyone just kind of wanted to take a lot of care with it, was kind of the main thing. The producers were really keen on getting, the story right and the storytelling right, and they wanted us to be able to do a really good job as well. They kind of left the door open for us to be able to contribute that way as well, and so it was good. It meant we could kind of really kind of indulge ourselves a little bit, and they helped us do that, which was fantastic.
I mean, what's unusual, even after the music was delivered to Brendon, he would then spend a full day, sometimes longer, on each episode with Noah and Tom, basically going through the music with a fine-tooth comb.
Mm.
And that's pretty, I've never actually encountered that way of doing things. Normally it's like, okay, music's signed off, goes to the editor, then ends up in the mix, and then we tweak it in the mix. But, you know, a good chunk of time was dedicated to each episode to get all those musical elements right in the room with everyone together, which I think you can hear in the end product, the level of care that was put into that.
So quite a collaborative kind of creative process then throughout.
Yeah,
it was super collaborative in the music, especially by the end. It was that classic thing where at one we were just finding our feet, and by the time we were signing off the last episode, it was a well-oiled machine. And it was so collaborative. You know, we would hit sections, and I think by the end, the way that it was working so well was that sections wouldn't even be completely scored. You know, there would be I think I remember in the last episode, maybe the where they raid the Tip Top factory, and that whole section they'd had a few sketches for, but the whole idea was that we'd just bring some stems into our handover session and we'd just muck around with it in there. And so it was quite cool. It was, oh, how about we try that drum from that track and we'll put it here and we'll spin some delays off it, and then we'll bring in this hip hop that Joel has, and it became like a real collage that we were putting together in the studio. And it was pretty cool as well for me, because they sort of would value my input. Often, you know, you're just the guy who just pushes the buttons and you just action, but they were really cool at trying to, you know, my ideas, and could float those in there as well, which was cool.
Yeah, that sounds nice. It sounds novel. Yeah.
It was really cool. And so like Jordan was saying, just the full thing had a really good vibe about collaboration, and all ideas were welcome. And I think that means you get the best of everyone's ideas, you know. And obviously Tom and Noah sort of had the final say on whether the thing was working or not. But certain sequences like that are actually really, they're changing and they're quite dynamic, and it's not just a piece of score that's being slapped in there. And if you really pay attention to it, you can hear there's a lot going on that really does marry up to the visuals, and I think it makes those sequences way better for it.
Yeah, and if you add to that, when you were doing those sessions with those guys right at the end, Brendon would have temp mixes of what I'd done with the sound design, and dialogue had been cleaned up by Jordan, and perhaps some Foley in there, which helped paint the full picture. So when they're making decisions, they can make informed decisions about, you know, maybe we don't need score in this bit, you know, because the fight scene effects are strong enough without needing it, and vice versa. So that just helped everything be quite informed in terms of decision making.
Sure.
Which again is something which normally happens in the mix, but if you get it to a really good point before it's gone into the mix, then everything's going to be stronger again.
Question from the floor. Did you get much change? Did you get a lot of change notes from directors and producers? It sounds like it kind of was just until it was signed off. Was it one of those ones where the sign off was moving, or was it just, did you have a deadline, or a hard deadline?
There were hard deadlines. There's always hard deadlines.
Yes. Arbitrary deadlines, I call them.
I mean,
yeah.
I can't speak for the others. I wasn't. No, actually, none of us were in the final mix sessions.
Right.
Which Gareth did. I know from a sound design perspective, I had hardly any notes at all. But anything.
Because you're just that good.
No, well, there is that, but thank you for saying that. But I think it's down to a trust thing. I've worked on most of Tom Hearn's projects, and I think I know what he expects and deserves. But it was also a case of anything that needed addressing, Tom might approach me, and you know, it was just the odd thing here and there, but generally it would be minor stuff, and there were things that Gareth would be able to address in the mix pretty quickly. We probably left a little bit too much to Gareth to do in the mix from my perspective, but that's all good. In terms of music and dialogue, you guys can answer that.
Maybe. Oh, sorry. Before we get to music, so we can talk about that. I do want to get to sound design as well. So maybe let's sort of get there via music and dialogue. Who wants to speak to that?
Sure. I mean, I was just going to say, like, in terms of like things getting signed off and stuff, at least from a dialogue perspective, I mean, majority of the stuff, I'd often have the producers kind of in with me during ADR anyway. So anything that I'd edited or the episodes that Brendon had edited, they were kind of just checking in and seeing where things were at anyway. And often with those kind of ADR sessions as well, again, it's very kind of open collaborative sort of thing. Anything that they felt like needed to be addressed or added at the time kind of gets done at the time. And then if there's any kind of other questions, it just sort of gets fed back after the first or second watch down kind of thing, and kind of approach it that way. Yeah.
Sure. Now we're going to come back to ADR and loop
Yeah.
groups and all the other crazy good times. Nick, can you talk a little bit about sound design? Was there a lot of sound design in the series?
Well, I guess that brings us to the question of sound design versus just sound effects editing, which I can't answer that. I don't know, but there was, there was quite a lot of sound effects, obviously, setting the mood of that period of time and getting things kind of authentically of the era, that kind of thing. In terms of, I guess, what you could call sound design, where you're creating moods and textures using non-literal sounds, there wasn't a heap of that. There's a little bit in episodes 1 and 3, I think. It's a few drones and tones, and generally I would be motivated to do that kind of thing via the offline, and I get provided something from the editor and they've laid in some kind of mood sound effect, and so I'd take that as my blueprint and then try and work on that and build on that. But I don't think the series necessarily tonally lended itself to a lot of that, because the music was doing so much to create the mood in itself. So I kind of tried to do that kind of thing sparingly, and I don't even know if all of it ended up in the final mix, because the music possibly did the job. So there's a little bit of that, but it's usually I just kind of tried to create a authentic mood using, ambiences and that kind of thing, but without kind of stepping out of my lane and treading on.
Well, that's always the question I ask in every single one of these, panels that we do, is that where does the sound design stop and where does the music begin? And do you work with the composer at all, or do they just give you the music and then you work around it, or is it a bit of back and forward?
It's every project is completely different. Like there's no, you have different composers who like working in different ways. Some are really collaborative, some you just don't hear from until the end, and it just depends. In this case, I didn't have really anything to do with the compositional side of things. That was all being done in the background. I think I did most of my work before hearing almost any of the music. So I just kind of treated it as though there was no music and make it sound good, and leave it up to the mixer and the rest of the team to decide what they want. But I think as long as you provide something underneath that sounds good, all bases are covered.
Sure. Okay.
But it is a grey, murky line sometimes, and I think having open, collaborative conversations with the composer and the director as to what they want is always good at the start of a project, not so much at the end. But it is. Yeah, it changes in each one. I think you just need to have those conversations and figure out what's happening. But at the same time, sometimes it's organic, sometimes the score traditionally doesn't cover a mood that you're wanting. And I think sending whips to each department is pretty key in this point. I always encourage the composers to send me their whips as early as possible, which sometimes you have resistance to, which I understand because it works both ways. You don't want to present anything until it's finished. Perfect. And it's and that's understandable, but it does really help inform you as to what you need to do or how far you need to take a certain scene.
Right. Okay, cool. Now, did you use any stuff from like featuring sound design or any original sound from the actual recordings? I mean, the actual live recordings on set, etc.
No, not that I can think of.
There was some car
Was
stuff,
it?
right? Remember there was that. There was a couple
Actually,
of things where the cars were great.
That's true. Yeah, which is gold. Yeah, there was it was the police car, right? It's when Chelsea takes off in the police car.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like spluttering along the driveway. And that kind of thing could be hours of work and possibly need re-recording the car because it's really hard to fudge cars. But Soundy did a great job of recording that, so I could just whack that straight in. But it's not always possible because there's directors screaming and generators and crew and cars and wind and
yes. Well, I guess that kind of leads into the ADR question. I mean, did you have to do lots of ADR? Was there tons and tons of tidy up needed, or
there was a moderate amount of ADR? I think we try not to do ADR where possible. I think often we're kind of trying to get the most true performance that we can. We're quite lucky in that the sound recordist majority of the shoot was Craig O'Reilly. And so he would double boom everything, have lavs on everyone, and then he'd also record, like, he got in contact quite early on as well, actually, and we were able to kind of ask him to record wild lines to be able to, have something from the day as close to the performance literally in time as possible. And then kind of resync that up and then hopefully get around not having to do ADR. In terms of the amount of ADR, there was definitely a few episodes that were kind of heavier than others, I think, in terms of that. But again, we try not to overcook it too much.
Because it was recorded. There was some studio stuff. Was it all over the place, or there was obviously a lot of stuff out on the street and all sorts of location?
I think there was maybe some sets, but majority I think was on location. Like I think particularly there was the Panthers HQ. I think must have been a location, but like
that was the big hall sort of
where they kind of all rally together. The one with like all the couches and things and kind of posters everywhere, and that had an incredibly creaky floor. And so the sound recorders got in quite early and gone, hey, we're trying to do everything we can to sort this out. But we knew at the beginning of that, we're like, okay, we're probably going to need to look at these scenes. And we did end up doing a few bits in some of those scenes. I won't point exactly to which things we ADR'd because that would be telling. But
I think there was one shoot day, their first shoot day in the HQ, which was incredibly creaky. So that's when the Soundy sent in his rushes and went, is this fixable? And we fix the floor. So I think they did. I think they went around and they nailed down the floorboards.
And there's always going to be like
those
anomalies.
Difference.
It makes a huge difference. And and it's great that he had the time and care to be able to do that and let us know on the outset too. But there was some things we did have to do ADR for. I mean, we always end up having to do stuff for clarity and requests that the producer wants as well, added lines and things like that. Particularly as sort of more shows get sold at the moment to streaming services as well. There's always this sort of conversation of how much do we need to ADR for an international audience happens quite a bit as well.
No, why would that be? Just as a novice, is that in terms of clarity or like? In
terms of clarity, I think people are getting a lot more used to sort of our South Pacific accent now, but there's always a line I think that people try to play, but I think we kind of stayed true to that in the series as much as possible.
I mean, that was my overall impression. It's incredibly, even though there's the sort of magical quality to the way the series is put together, it's very realistic. It seemed very kind of just real.
I think that everything that kind of came together with that is kind of a combination of all our efforts on that front as well, particularly with Gareth's mixing, the way he was able to kind of sit everything, just kind of glue it in place.
You just throw everything at him and it just say
well, exactly, as Nick was saying, it's like you kind of supply the mixer with as much as you can, because at the end of the day, like Brendon was saying as well, you're sort of collaborating up to the very last minute. So if there's something that needs to be removed, but at least you provided it, get rid of it at that point then. And so you're just trying to have enough to create the world you want, even though there's parts of the show that was quite stylized.
Yeah, better to maybe have more than less to work with. And in terms of working with, I guess in these sessions, we talked before about working to do sort of loop groups and their sort of crowd scenes and all that sort of stuff. How did that work? And did COVID affect any of the production, or was it kind of pretty?
I think we were all right.
You were all right.
We kind of, there might have been, there was a level 3 maybe in the middle of some bits, but I don't think the production was like impacted, not in post for sure as well. But yeah, in terms of like loop group and stuff like that, we would do it in blocks. So you just kind of, when I do a dialogue pass, I'll kind of spot kind of areas that kind of need a bit more movement, things that might be worth grabbing for a music and effects mix, things that may not be covered in sound effects. You can get a lot of group sort of things in sound effects, but the idea with this show, I think, was just try and make it very much part of 1970s Auckland and the variety of different people that we have in Aotearoa. So it was worth kind of getting lots of different groups of people through. So we'd end up kind of doing blocks of 3 episodes, it ended up being, I think. We'd do a group where we kind of have all the guys being the police people, and then we'll kind of get other people coming in for the market and just trying to keep things as authentic as possible, because each kind of little peppering of stuff kind of helps build that authentic world that you're talking about.
Sure. So what does 1970s Auckland sound like, I guess? And that's a question for all of you.
Like the show.
Like the show. That's what it sounds like. And I guess that means
that to you guys.
What about Foley as well? Like we need to talk about Foley. Who did Foley on this?
Our team at Native did the Foley. So it was Sam Moore, and he took control of that, and did a really good job. There was a lot of group scenes, which is always the challenge. When you got 50 people on screen, who do you cover? You can't cover it all.
Yes.
Oh, you can, but it takes ages. I think, so it's, Foley with group scenes is always the biggest challenge, I think, and there was a lot of that,
Right.
Yeah.
So, I guess I was quite interested, but you said cars before are tricky. Is it getting the right Holden 1972 whatever cop car or something?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, you just make sure you don't have any modern sounding cars, but when there's a hero car, make sure it's kind of relatively authentic, which isn't always possible. I mean, ideally we would go and record those exact cars, and it was mooted as an option. We managed to get by without needing to do that. I think it was kind of a timing and budgetary decision, but at the same time, I think we got enough, like we were saying before, with production sound to be able to cover some key moments. And then out of my library, I was able to kind of piece together the rest of it and get it sounding kind of believable. I think actually Brendon actually did the spot effects on a couple of episodes, and he had the most challenging car scene. I had to jump onto another project, and then I saw that particular scene. I think it was episode 5 where they're pulling down the statue in Australia with the ute. Yeah. So I was like, oh, good luck, Brendon, over to you, mate.
That took a long time to get that right. Doing research on what statues are made of to see, because it's
really
because they pull the statue down to the ground, and it's kind of like you need to make it heavy, but then is it metallic or is it kind of like, you couldn't quite tell. And then the VFX weren't finished, but there was a note at the bottom of the screen, sparks fly off statue or something, because they come around the corner, and then so I figured it must be some sort of brass or copper or something like that. And the car itself was really tricky because it was an old grunty van, and like Nick was saying, to have that option to record it would be awesome. but it was all happening quite thick and fast, and we couldn't get that. So I think actually that was actually one where I managed to pull a lot. I think I reached out to Jordan and I said, can you just pull everything you can for scene, whatever it is, and just send it to me? And then just trawled through everything that was recorded on that day, just trying to find stuff of that car. And it turned out to be really good. There were heaps of moments that I could use to pull out and then loop. And then that sort of became the basis of the car, which then you can beef up with some library stuff. That took a long time, that scene though. When I first watched it down, I thought, oh.
So are car nerds going to be able to say that's not the 1972 Hillman Hunter or whatever? I'm not.
Hopefully not. Hopefully it's pretty good. I think we made a pretty good effort to be pretty close to what I mean, whether it's an early 1972 Hunter or late, probably someone out there will find a problem with it. But
there's angry comments. Angry comments.
Yeah, if you're noticing and annoyed by stuff like that, I think you really need to reconsider your life. And,
Agreed. Yeah. You never read the comments anyway. That's
no.
Never. Speaking of comments, the live feed has actually crashed, so we're just going to carry on. So unfortunately, that means I can't get any questions from. We're still recording it, so we're going to put it up afterwards.
Sure.
But it does mean I can't get any questions from the floor. Which might mean that I might need to get you to volunteer some subjects. Or I guess things that were interesting for you personally to work on this project, or things that you've taken away from it. Discuss.
I just think, all the stories we work on are valid in their own way. I think this was particularly interesting, being from Auckland and knowing about dawn raids kind of vaguely, but kind of not really engaging in the human aspect of it. And kind of, it was actually an eye-opener. It was like, holy crap, this is happening in our city. This is awful. And it was really interesting. It was a story that absolutely needed to be told. And and I think it's probably hit the mark in terms of telling it in a way which has made people a lot more aware of what was going on and how far society's come now, and also how far it's got to go. But it's amazing that in our lifetimes how overtly racist society was. It's just insane.
I mean, that was the thing that it would shock any of us. Just like, oh my god, I can't believe people said that, or would act like that, or just not say anything when people say things that are profoundly unpleasant.
Well, being white men, I think we're kind of like slightly outside the
of course,
we're probably lacking the awareness, so I think it's good to be informed, of our own education, because we don't get subjected to that kind of thing, whether it be overt or subtle, I mean, some people argue it's easier when it's more overt. At least it's there out in the open, rather than being kind of, I'm not really racist, but maybe it's another whole conversation. Who knows? And Jordan, what are your big takeaways from this series?
I mean, I'm a migrant to New Zealand from like 2004 myself, so it was kind of like there was always going to be some aspects of New Zealand history that I didn't kind of actually end up.
Do you have your passport
through school?
Can you show?
Can you show us, mate?
Both of them, baby. No, but it's it was eye-opening to me in that, like, also people that are my age and did still grow up here were not necessarily kind of in the same way Nick was saying, kind of fully aware of like the impact it had and the human aspect of it. But in terms of like the series itself, I'm very happy to have been able to be a part of it, and obviously it's doing really well. Well,
I think a second season might be pretty likely by the sounds of things, or
potentially.
I think they've got an initial funding grant for script development, I think. Something along those lines.
I mean, I guess it could have been my feeling, and I guess what they probably wanted to avoid strongly was creating just a dry biopic, about a historical thing that's sort of stuffy, and that the fact that they've really tried, and Tom Hearn's very good at that, at speaking to a contemporary sort of audience. I mean, that's how you kind of get breakthrough and cut through, especially in a market that's just saturated with endless content. You know, how do you get that cut through? And this is different enough to do that, I think, and from an international point of view, maybe as well. Brendon, what was your major takeaway from this?
I mean, obviously, other than the you know, the content that these guys are talking about, which is of course all true, I think just on a sort of soundpost music audio side, I think that collaborative stuff we've been talking about, which is just it was so nice and so refreshing and such a cool thing that, you know, it would be great to take to other projects. And I know that not every project can work that way, depending on how roles are siloed and who's where and stuff. But there was such a good, beautiful result, I think, that came out of, you know, for example, these sessions that we had doing the music, or just having lots of people in the room and lots of group decision making and just trying stuff out. And I think that when you do get the best of everyone's abilities in a room like that, then you end up getting the sum of all those parts, rather than so much of our work can often just be that sort of siloed, you know, you're over here, do your thing, send us a whip in 2 months and we'll see if it's good or not. And I was going to say earlier on, when you guys were talking about whether we had that question about whether there were many notes from production, at least in my case, like, it never really happened that way, which was quite nice. It was never like we ever sent anything and said, you know, give us your feedback on this, because all the decisions were made in the room and things were tried at the time. And I think, at least for Gareth, that was really good, giving him that stuff for the mix, because then he could be confident with however the music was playing is kind of what was intended. And, you know, minus a few notes I would give him, it would be like, this is how the soundtrack should probably sound, and then do your thing with it. But this is the sort of baseline. And I think it made, at least on the music side, a really nice streamlined way of working, which I think would be nice to carry into other projects where possible.
Well, the fact that you say it's streamlined, which on the face of it, it sounded incredibly bloody complicated with lots of different moving parts. But it sounded like it was, as you say, a proper collaborative team effort.
I think that, of course, like, there was definitely challenges with getting stuff organized, and just even to begin with in the first couple of episodes, when you're setting everything up, about how do you even handle all this material. You know, I think originally I was looking to get stems from Joel for a lot of the hip hop stuff, and then I was sort of pulling it all down, and, you know, he sort of had his 808s and his sub bass and everything was in there, and I'd play it all together, and it didn't quite sound as good as his master, because his workflow isn't like that. You know, he has all sorts of stuff chaining off his master bus, and then it was sort of like, well, why do we even need stems for this? You know, the process of having stems and what would normally be done to be able to provide that to a mixer. And then I just called Gareth and said, look, you don't really need stems for this, do you? And that was good. You know, once we had that process set up, then I knew that a lot of the material that was coming from Joel we don't need it stemmed out. Sounds great, plays well. Gareth can throw those stereo mixers through an up mixer so it plays nicely in 5.1. And same thing with Jonathan, had a really good workflow. So I think, like with any show, mainly the first episode is that real crunch time of just getting your systems in place, and that was particularly tricky. But then by the last episode, we were humming in a really nice collaborative way. Sure,
absolutely. I guess that's, I mean, I'm sure you all feel the same way. I mean, when you look at major films and series and that sort of thing, you see the same people working together again and again and again. I mean, it's what clients are anyway. But do you work with, not just on this? I mean, I noticed, Nick, I think you said you've worked with Tom Hearn before on other series. Yeah. Had you? So do you have that with, do you have lots of other clients who are repeat clients coming back, and you're working on, you can see their career align with yours? Yeah, generally they come back. You know, it's not always up to the directors, and, you know, sometimes you know, there's different reasons behind going to various places, and you know, co-productions mean that sometimes post needs to go overseas and stuff like that. But yeah, generally that's what we try and do. We try and get a good relationship and do an awesome job, and Tom and I get on really well, and we've had some really cool projects together. So it's just a continuation of that, really. Sure. And how are you guys, I guess, working in the current environment in terms of, for those who are watching or not in Auckland, if we're all still in a 5 week? I think time has become irrelevant, but I think it's been about 4 or 5 weeks.
Yeah,
to say.
I have no idea.
Been ages. Too long.
How do you guys work at the moment?
Well, it's definitely a challenge to a certain extent. I'm basically, the day of lockdown, I started a feature film track lay and mix that's playing at the Vancouver Film Festival next week.
Right.
So my first kind of 3 weeks were pretty uncomfortable on the hours front. This is my studio here, actually, which is basically the day of lockdown got announced. We just all jumped in and shoveled gear into the boot. So this is actually, I've got Native's theatre computer sitting here, and bits and pieces. And so obviously I'm mixing a 5.1 film for a festival through headphones, which has challenges. But what I've had to do, so I've basically track laid it and mixed it in stereo, but my session is 5.1, and I've kind of folded it down on the master bus, and I'm listening through headphones, obviously, which is stereo, but I've used my eyeballs and experience to mix the ambience and music kind of around to a level that I think, intellectually should sit about right. And then I've sent my mix to a friend of mine in Melbourne, guy Simon Rosenberg from Windmill, who mixed a film for me a few months ago called Nude Tuesday. And I basically gave him a day. I sent him stems, 5.1 stems, and said, make it sound good in a room. So I had 1 day just to give it some broad strokes, make sure it's like the first ever screening of 5.1 isn't in the premiere in Vancouver.
There's not a thundering sub bass that you can't hear on your headphones.
Everything. Yeah, but he actually said it wasn't too bad. So that went off last night, and now I'm doing a short film that's playing at the New Zealand Film Festival.
And all on headphones. You don't have any other monitor at all.
I do. I've got really fancy speakers just there, but they're huge. And given that like 90% of what I'm doing is track laying, sound effects, I wanted 3 monitors, as you can see, because I'm greedy guts, and I've sacrificed speakers for screens because I didn't have enough room for both. Well, I did, but then I'd be looking up like that the whole time, and my neck is problematic. So, and I've got really nice headphones. I've used these for years, so I feel like I can get away with it.
You don't use any of those, that software that simulates different rooms and all that blah 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 for headphones? I don't know.
No, I don't. No.
I'm just wondering if anybody does use those.
I've tried them, but they're kind of, you're always sort of guessing, well, what room's this? At least you kind of like, for me, the way I'm working at the moment is I kind of have to I've set up a room. Same with Nick. It was just sort of like, we've done it before last year, just like rip everything out at the 11th hour, grab a suite, everyone, and take it home. And because we're lucky enough that we kind of don't need to have great setups at home because we work in the studio. That's what that's for. We just kind of, frankly, making do. Like, you just kind of have to work with what you've got, and then just know and kind of trust your instincts a bit. And then with stuff from what Nick's doing, is you have someone else that you trust to kind of help you out a little bit as well. I think that's kind of the thing you can do. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, it sounds like, though, if I need a small, boxy kind of room sound with a really horrible sounding wave, your room sounds perfect for that. I'd be like, I'll just get you to record some voiceover.
I chose it for that, just so you could really bring up that resonant frequency of this white wall.
And so, Jordan and Brendon, what are you guys working on? Are you working on some of the same projects or different projects now?
We're on different things.
Different things?
Different things. I'm, because obviously I work in a freelance capacity, and I work for these guys a bunch. I I helped Nick out on the feature that he was talking about, doing some dialogue right at the start of lockdown. And luckily, just by pure chance, I had done a big upgrade on my room here at home a couple of months ago. And so that was pure chance. And it meant that I was kind of good to go. And it was really lucky. And I am also doing some remote freelance stuff for an advertising studio because one of the engineers is having a baby. And so I just sort of took that over. So doing lots of remote Zooms and Source Connect ups and that kind of stuff, running it all from here. And it's all good. Obviously, it's nicer to be in the room with everyone, but it is what it is.
Well, life goes on. Life goes on, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we're quite lucky that we can actually, work in some capacity because a lot of people I know can't. So, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always said all we do is move zeros and ones around anyway. We can do that anywhere. I mean, obviously, monitoring in a nice room is good as well. And Jordan, what are you up to?
I've been dialogue editing on a short that Nick's working on at the moment, and there's some other kind of shows that are more kind of, I guess, factual series and things like that. So luckily I'd mixed the first couple at the studio, so I was kind of able to trust what I'd already done was kind of right in my templates and kind of things like that. So it's not like particularly mission critical sort of work at the moment, but it means that I can kind of trust what I've already laid through and do that really. So I've just been doing like live HD watch downs with the producers for those and just streaming that through Source Live, which is Source Elements product, and just kind of playing that down to them and then going, yeah, great, turn that up, turn this down. And it means they're watching it in the environment that it's ultimately going to be watched in anyway, which is in their lounge. So you can kind of like trust that it's probably going to be fine. So yeah, I think I was lucky in the type of work that we've kind of got coming through right now. And again, same with Brendon, there's a couple of VO records here and there too and things. But yeah, we all kind of have to wear different hats for different jobs at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully next week, I don't know what level 3 means for our lot, but I guess maybe back in the studio, don't know.
Yeah, it means that we can go back if we have to, but we won't have clients. So
not necessarily a bad thing. Always.
No.
Yeah.
No. Well, yeah.
As long as they get paid. Yeah.
Yeah. So it'll mean I can go back and then get this film that I mixed here and get it right for the next screening.
Sure.
And get it done properly.
Sure.
And stuff like that, and the solitude of my own room.
Exactly. Are there any, just before we wrap this up, is there any aspect of the Panthers that we haven't covered or anything else you want to mention? Otherwise we can wrap it up and then we can put this live, or not live, for the people who were trying to watch this before. Sure. Is there anything I've missed? Are there any wonderful details, any nice little stories or anecdotes you want to end on?
It felt so long ago, I can't remember.
You've already moved on to 3 projects since then.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because, by the time some shows do come out, it's sort of like often you're kind of 3 months into something else or what have you. So you kind of go, yeah. I mean, I had to rewatch a couple episodes just kind of bring my mind kind of back to everything and things. But yeah, I can't think of any other kind of really exciting stories.
No, it's just a nice production, really, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, sorry.
I was going to say, I'd be interested to see if they do get season 2, sort of what happens with the story and script and stuff, because obviously working on it, I was also a fan of it, like the other guys were saying before, it's such an interesting story and so crazy and such an enlightening kind of process to go through to learn about. So I'd be interested to see what where did the story go in real life and what will they do with it in season 2.
Yeah, looking forward to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, I hope we can have you guys back, maybe next year in the flesh at some event so we can, talk about more music and sound issues. Thank you very much for your time today. And I'm sure this will be a huge hit on Vimeo when we put it on there. But yeah, thank you. And look, I hope to see you again in level 2 or something.
Yeah, likewise.
I'm sure we'll look forward to having some takeaways. I personally just want to go to Mitre 10 and get some potting mix. All I've wanted for 3 weeks.
Not essential?
Gumboots are, but not potting mix.
Oh, so you can stand in the potting mix, but you can't get the potting mix.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
gutting.
Yeah, it is. It really is. Cool. All right. Well, I'll stop recording there, and thank you very much.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thanks, Marshall.
Thanks.
Cheers, Marshall.
Cheers.
And thanks, John.